Hello everyone. So in this video today we are going to be going over more of the faction traits, and we're going to be going into more advanced faction traits and how to work with them. But before we begin, I kind of want to just go over something real quick. So if in your schema you just have a blank schema, you may have noticed that there might be a couple of problems and that whatever you have, it won't actually load. And the reason for that is because unless you have the GUI and the simulation specifically added into your schema, the game itself won't recognize what you added in your simulation and your GUI folders and documents. So, without further ado, we're going to just go into our schema and we're going to add these sort of documents right now. So for right now, the thing that what we're going to need is we're going to need our GUI. So I'm not gonna delete all of this in our mod because there's going to be a bunch of different things that we can. Actually, you know what? I'm probably just going to block a lot of these out, just so that way if there is a problem, I will also notice it when we are working on the mod itself. But as for now, I'm going to keep everything that we need for our faction traits. So for right here, what we have is that we have our database. What you're going to need is that you're going to need to write database plugin, and the data type is going to be amplitude.unity.gui.gui element. And what this is that this is just saying, okay, everything in the GUI element document, we're going to, like, the computer is going to, and the game is going to read in the file amplitude unity GUI element in this sort of in this mod folder area. And these extra types, these are things that you can also add that's part of the GUI. Like you can specifically add like the GUI element technology and all this other stuff. But for now, I'm going to just comment this out because this isn't specifically needed for our thing. Actually, the only thing that we do need is the extra type amplitude unity GUI extended GUI element. This is just so that way it's just saying kind of like everything in GUI. But there's another way of how you can also say everything, which is also after you close this sort of extra types, you'll have you want to type in a file path, which is going to say, okay, read the file path GUI elements with a star in between brackets .xml. This is saying that this is saying for GUI elements, if we were to get rid of the star and the brackets, it would just say the file that is called GUI elements. We're going to take a look at that. But since we have the brackets and star, basically what that means is that it's going to say anything that is in the GUI elements. So if you have GUI elements technology, GUI elements faction traits, all that stuff, because it says GUI elements first and it has brackets in it, that's when you're going to, they're also going to be read as well. So scrolling down, so that's all we really need for the GUI, because we're just doing a simple GUI elements. For right now we have our simulation. This is one for our construction element, which we will need later. But for now, and the other thing is that if you do want this, like all this stuff, but you don't really want to type it all in, you can just go onto my mod or anyone else's mod, or well, most other people's mods, and if you go into there, you can see, like, for example, this is my Kazanji faction mod. Double click on my schema and you can just copy the entire thing here. But for now, dealing with this, this is everything. This database plugin is for everything that deals with the construction portion of XML. And there's a lot right here, but for now, since we are not dealing with this, I'm going to just block all this out because this doesn't have to deal with the faction traits themselves. This is another construction thing, which we don't need. The construction elements, basically what those are is that deals with like technology and research in a sense. It's more as in I guess adding to your empire. I'm not specifically. It's kind of hard to say what it is specifically because it does deal with a lot of technology, and then it deals with buildings, and then it deals with like several other things as well. So think of it like another simulation descriptor, except more with the general overlay of the empire. So right here now this is our simulation descriptors, which is what we need. So we're gonna have our database plugin amplitude.unity.simulation descriptor, and then comma assembly c slash not slash but dash c sharp dash first pass, and then underneath here we're going to have our file paths. We don't need this quest right here because this specifically deals with quests, but I'm just going to leave it in for now. And then we have our file path because there is a file called simulation descriptors, just that. And then we also have our everything simulation descriptor right here. So I'm going to leave that in. I'm also going to leave in the, I'm going to leave in the first two because we need that. And I'm going to also leave in the quest because it's just something that's sort of this minute that like we might as well just leave it in. The other thing, and then we're down to faction. This is, we're adding in our factions. This adds the extra type, deals with like the the minor faction document, and then we have our simulation factions. Now I think for now we don't need this, but I don't necessarily want to comment that out because I have this. Actually, I'm just going to delete that. So I'm going to comment this out, and then that's going to be fine. And then right here we have our faction traits, and I'm gonna just leave this right here. The faction affinity, this deals with like what is considered a faction. Now I can comment this out because this doesn't specifically deal with faction traits, but I'm going to leave it in because this is definitely going to be used for our mod. And there are a couple of other things that are going to be used for our mod as well that I did comment out, but I'm just commenting those out for now. Just so that way later on when I get into the other videos I can just show you like what specifically to add for our mod. But ideally you should have like, if you can, you should have like as many of these sort of paths as possible because they won't hurt to have more of them, as long as they are correct, and it will only just hurt more if you don't have the right one. So the more you have the better essentially. But I'm just commenting these out so that we just know kind of specifically what to have if you want. The other thing. So getting back to the what I meant to say earlier with the actual how it can hurt if you like don't have the correct one, and what that means is that if you, let's say that I actually type in faction and then have a capital B Buffinity. Because that isn't a specific C# program, or not C# program, but because that isn't a specific XML document, our game will crash when we try to validate it. So I just kind of leave that as is. Not leave it as is, but that's why we can't actually just add in just whatever we want. We have to make sure that it is the correct one. And so these deal with simulation faction traits and factions in general. And then I guess I don't really want to go too much into this, but like the rest of this are kind of just like smaller things like unit body that deals with like units. So if you want to work on actually creating new units, you get the unit designs, unit body, definitions. The unit abilities, these deal specifically with like creating the abilities, battle actions. These deal with like how the actual like character fights. And the mapping is a whole thing on its own because the mapping deals with the actual whole 3D design of a mod. And then we have to have our localization right here. Like this is just saying like, hey, look at our localization. We have the localization plugin, and then we have a directory. Then we close our localization plugins, and then we have like a close into our plugins because all of these are plugins. So with that, I am going to end this, and I'm going to save this, and I'm going to Actually, oh well, I probably shouldn't have saved that because I kind of don't want to have all that blocked out, but it's whatever. But basically, that's kind of like how you run a schema. Now, getting into the main point of this video, we are going to now start to work on the more advanced faction traits. Now, though this looks long, this isn't necessarily advanced. Like, this isn't too difficult to actually mod in. The first thing that we are going to do that's slightly more difficult to mod in than this is going to be our free right here, which is just one, which is going to be +1 morale on units and plus 50% approval rating on city. And so what I'm going to do, I'm going to just copy this right here just because I don't really feel like typing out that entire thing. And I'm going to have a space, and then I'm going, not space, but I'm going to enter it, and then I'm going to close it off as well. And I'm going to change this to be free, so that way, for the name of our faction trait. Let's see. Okay, so for now, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to go into my I'm gonna go into my Unity game because I want to see how they call in this type, like what they call in for like the morale, because the problem with simulations is that you have to use the specific target property and the specific path, or else it won't work. And I just want to make sure that I'm using the right things so that way I don't have any problems. So I'm going to go into faction traits, and I'm going to use my Silix faction as a dividing between the public and everything else. And I'm going to type in morale. Then we have battle initiative per morale. And we can see, not entirely sure if that is the correct thing to have. Because I don't want to really waste too much time, I'm instead just going to go into my mod, my Kazanji faction mod, and I'm just going to see what I have written there. But like if this was something that I already didn't have and I need to like look for a new target property, what I can do is that I could type in morale, and I could just find in all files and look for it inside. Well, for right now, I think this is everything in simulation. So I can just do that, click find all, and it will show me every time morale is mentioned in my simulation file inside the Endless Legend public. But because I don't want to really do that and go through all of this, I'm just going to look through for my thing. But if you were working on this and this was a target property that you don't know, that's how you would go about it. And you would just look for anything that mentions morale and just check to see if it's a target property and if it's something that you want. So I'm going to copy this right here, and I'm going to just add it to here. And so what I want to kind of mention that is a little bit more advanced for this is the path that this has. So when you're so for right now we're going to stick with this one right here because this we don't really need to do anything with. But when you're dealing with something that that's with a military unit, you need to have two paths for it, assuming that you want it for all unit types, because the militia isn't considered like a unit you can control, and it's just something that's stuck in the city. It's not considered a class unit, or a class unit in the sense that in the sense that like it will affect like all units. Like you have to specifically, what I'm just getting at is that you have to also specifically mention /militia/class unit whenever you're dealing anything with the military that you want to affect with all of your units. And this affects like things outside of simulation as well. Anytime you're making anytime you're making a military unit, there's times when you need to actually call it not into, like when you're working on like the constructibles, you also have to call it in as something that the city is going to produce as well. And so you have to call on both the class unit and militia as well. The other thing I wanted to show about this is that even though this doesn't specifically like affect the class city or a class or like the empire in general, like this isn't something that would be necessarily considered a trait per se. This when you have this in, this will affect all units, and it is like treated as a faction trait. So it's just a bit weird, and just something to sort of like just show you like the sort of what everything you could possibly do with Endless Legend modding. And the other thing that I wanted to show with this is for the last one, which is the city approval and how we use the percent. See, we wouldn't necessarily use addition. If we were to say instead that operation addition, this will just add 0.5 approval rating to our city. If we were to multiply this, this will just multiply our entire city approval by half. But since we're using percent, basically what this is saying is that we're going to increase our approval rating percentage by 50%. So whatever approval rating we have, we're going to multiply that essentially by 0.5 and then add it to our class city. Not class city, but we're going to add that to our total approval. So that's how this works, and that's the difference really between percentage, multiplication, and addition. But in a sense, I guess you could also just say that like multiplication by 1.5, but and maybe do some other things. But like this is just a much better way, much clearer way of how to go about this. So now that we have that, I'm not going to go into the faction trait custom yet. I kind of want to get the other simulation descriptors down. Actually, well, you know what? I actually need to use the faction trait custom if I'm going to use this. If I'm going to make the sharing simulation descriptor right now. So this is now really getting into like the more advanced stuff. The sharing. So let's say that you want your faction to have a trait like converting someone, or having it where you can detect a person in your empire, similar to how the sharing works in for the Wild Walkers. And with these, there isn't. If we were to, I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to go into the simulation descriptors right here, and we are going to see. So this is the sharing, and you can see that there's actually nothing really specifically written about it. Now, sometimes there are some now, even though there might not be a specific simulation modifier descriptor written right here, there's sometimes written in like trait customs or other things like that. But just to sort of like speed things up, there's no way you can really like edit this specific trait, and you can't edit the sort of the conversion trait as well. So you can't just copy the simulation modifier descriptor of the sharing, but there are ways to go about this to add this to your empire. And the way you do that is you can go. Well, for now we're going to go into our faction traits custom. But if we were to work on this in our faction trait, we would we wouldn't just specifically add this to our faction trait custom. We would add this to another faction trait sort of area in general, because there are other faction trait documents. But for now, just to make things not as confusing, for now what we're going to do is that we are going to copy this right here, and we're just going to paste that. So we're going to have our very specific thing right here, and I'm going to call this sharing. So everything's the same. I'm just going to get rid of this because we don't really need that for now. And yeah, so right now, and the reason how this sharing trait works, and these other like similar faction traits that you can't edit in modding works, is that it's actually edited in the Unity code itself, which we don't have access to. So in the game itself, they are editing. They are the game itself does have this code, but because this is probably this is like a bit more advanced than for like XML itself, they may have added that this is probably just specifically in C Sharp, and so there's nothing we can actually do to specifically edit it. So you can never edit this. However, what you can do is that you can add this to your faction trait customs by changing the title of faction trait specific diet or faction trait whatever to the faction trait mad fairies the sharing. And when we go and we play test this, you will see that we will actually have in our faction trait sharing, we will have our faction trait mad fairies the sharing. So although we can't actually edit the faction trait itself, what we can do is that we can add this to our faction trait, and we can add this to our different major factions as well. So that's how we typically go about modding these sort of difficult faction traits into the game. So for right now, we don't have anything specifically right here. I mean, I guess what we could do, just to prevent any like potential problems, we can copy this and paste that right here and just call this faction trait. Well, it wouldn't even matter if we call it like faction trait the sharing or anything, because it's not, the faction trait custom isn't even reading this. If we would just call this faction trait the sharing, the faction trait customs sharing right here isn't even reading faction trait the sharing, because it's reading instead faction trait mad fairies the sharing right here instead of this one right here. So we don't even need this right here, which is actually just helping us limit our organization and like help us keep our documents organized. So with that being said, I'm going to go into custom, and I'm just going to also add the I'm going to also add the other faction trait that we just created, the faction trait free, and I'm going to just call this not that. Okay, I guess I'm just going. Okay, I'm gonna have to type that all in again. So we have faction trait free. We're going to call this instead. We're going to reference this to our simulation description, faction trait free. And yeah, so now when we go into our custom game, we have now 3 options to pick from. We can pick from the specific diet, our free trait, or our sharing trait. And so yeah, so we got that one done, and the next one that we have to deal with is the our major faction specific. So every time I make a major faction, I like to have them have a specific trait. And for the Silics, since in the game themselves they add like 5% bonus of the strategic resource mining for every village you convert or like assimilate. I think that it would be really cool to have it where we have the what was I going to say? Oh yeah, where we have the 0.5 strategic resource for every population we have, or maybe like 0.5 for every population we have, or maybe every city. It doesn't matter, something like that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down to the point where we see the simulation description of the minor factions. Now, remember last video when I was talking about binary simulation modifier description? So the way that what those are is that those are basically where you actually, you know what? I'll best explain this when I'm just going to read this from like left to right, like I did with the simulation modifier descriptor. So I'm going to just go on to the Kazanji for now, just to like show for example. So for right here, we have our binary simulation modifier descriptor, which we have our target property, which that's basically the same as for the simulation modifier descriptor one, so nothing changes there. We have our operation, and then we have something called the left and the right. Sometimes you'll have it where the left and the right will be next to each other. Sometimes they'll be separated by the binary operation. But it doesn't necessarily matter where you place them specifically, as long as they're in the same line right here. And I guess in a sense, as long as they're like after the operation, but even still, that doesn't necessarily matter. So basically, the way this works is that it's going to say so we look at the right here, and this is saying that all pacified villages of Kazanji, and because of our path right here in our empire type major, actually, well, no, this is what it's affecting. Never mind. So all of our pacified villages in the Kazanji, and I think I don't know specifically what the dollar sign represents, but I'm pretty sure that means like in the empire or in your empire, specifically. And on the left, this is just saying, and right here on the binary operation, this is saying, okay, we're going to multiply the left right here. So we're going to, so however many pacified villages of the Kazanji we have, we're going to multiply that by 0.05, and we're going to take that value and give it and multiply it with the percent to our city point target property, and we're going to have that affect our class city. So basically, this is just like an addition to value. So instead of having a value, we're instead saying, okay, we're going to take two different variables, and we're going to multiply their values together or add their values together depending on the binary operation to get a new value that wouldn't normally be that isn't a constant. So for right now, I'm going to look for the Silix. It's right here. So we have our Silix right here, and I am going to copy. Well, really, we don't need this target property right here. This is just saying this is just a counter for the minor faction assimilation. So I'm going to copy all of this right here, and I am going to add that to. I'm going to just put that there right now, and then I'm going to take this right here because I don't feel like typing the entire thing, and I'm going to put that right there, and then I'm going to just erase and delete all of that, bring everything right here for now, and put it right there. Let me just bring that back. Okay, so right now what we have is that we have our names, simulation descriptor modifier, which that's the that's just the same thing as before. Nothing changed. We have our resource bonus, which is like the resource that we're gaining when we're mining a resource deposit. But the main thing right here, we're going to, instead of reading straight to the operation addition, we're going to actually read the right first. We're going to say, for every pacified village of Silix that we have, we're going to multiply that by 0.5, and we're then going to add that to our resource bonus, and we're going to add that to our Empire Major Class City type resource deposit, resource extractor strategic sort of thing. So that's what this reads off as. However, we don't want this to affect for whenever we have a pacified village of the Silix. We want this for whenever we have, I guess in a sense, like a city or population. And so the way that we would go about this, well, I think it'd be a bit overpowered if we have it for any time we have a population, because adding 0.5 addition to a strategic resource bonus is pretty overpowered. So now thinking about it, I think that we're going to change it for any city that we have in our empire. So I think the way that this could work is that we're going to copy this class city, and we're going to replace this with our pacified village right here. We're going to have that multiply. We're going to have that multiply by 0.5, and then add that to our resource bonus. And then we're going to also add that to our node resource bonus, which is just the the node resource bonus is just I guess like the other ways of how you can like attribute this, like from conversion, like converting the Salix faction, or by VIA Mycara, where you have it where you sort of like grow like some sort of plant on the deposit, different things like that. And so now we're going to just change this to class city, and just to make sure that I am going about this correctly, I'm going to also go into my public endless legend file right here, and I'm going to copy the binary descript this right here. So I'm going to look for any time anytime our XML document right here uses a binary descriptor. So that way we can see if on the right they ever use, whenever they're referring to a city, if they use like class city. But if they don't, I have a good feeling that this is how they actually use it. And as you can tell, there are a lot, but they're not specifically in the they're not specifically in the minor factions. Even though this is commented out, we can still sort of see how they did go about this. And so far, we don't really see anything too specific. I'm going to scroll down again, see if this is war count, and then we get into number of rebuilt villages. Scrolling down, main city center display level. We don't need that. And then we're at the creeping nodes right now. Wonder what could be at the left, or well, the right really. Now we have our custom faction. We have peace count. And the right and the left, because they're being added or multiplied, it doesn't specifically matter which side you have like the dollar sign and which one side you have like, I guess, the value. Since like they are being multiplied or added. The only time this may make a difference is if you're subtracting. So, but I haven't really worked on the subtracting part, so I don't know which side it would subtract, but I'm pretty sure it would subtract the left from the right, or divide the left from the right, depending on which you're using. Okay, so there's none in here that specifically uses a class city. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm just going to just like leave that as is for now. And if this is a problem, then what we could always do is just refer this back to a population count. And then so for our last one, which is the dust eclipse. So although this one seems simple, the main reason why I kind of left this off till last is because the dust eclipse, they use, I think I mentioned this last time, but they use things such as hashtag. So if we looked up Heatwave, we will see that there are, we can see that there are sometimes, well, I don't know why they're not showing up here, but, oh, okay, we can see right here that when you want to refer to something that is only affected during the heat wave, towards the end, you do the hashtag Heatwave. For some reason, I'm not entirely sure why they have hashtag Heatwave here first and then comma class city. Oh, well, I guess maybe you just do like the Empire type major and then class city, something like that. But we'll follow this example for now. And what is our mod saying? We're I think it's plus 10 district dust on our cities during the heat wave per resource or resource extractors. Okay, yeah, that's fine. We can probably work with something like that. So what we're going to do is that we're actually going to take away our binary descriptor right here, because we don't need the binary descriptor for this right here, because it's just essentially a simulation modifier, but with like an extra thing at the end. Oh, and the other reason why I want to sort of mention this is because, like, if you don't have the Inferno pack, then this won't be of any help to you. Well, actually, I guess it could in a sense, because since the heat wave is a season, you can also use this to target other specific seasons. So, for example, if we want to have this trait be affected only in the summer or winter, we just do hashtag summer or hashtag winter, depending on which one you want. So for right now, I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to add that to here. We're going to change our target property to district dust. We're gonna leave addition. We're gonna change the value to 10, and we're gonna have this be called in our class city. I think the way we go about this, and I'm not entirely sure. And the problem with the heat wave itself is that it is difficult to determine to see like if it's working or not, because in order to actually determine if it works, you have to play long enough to see a heat wave, which for me personally, I don't like to play test for long amounts of time like that. I like to just play test it and see if it goes on really quickly. But for this right here, we need to actually play test it for a while to see if the heat wave works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just take that out. I'm going to do class. I'm going to do class. I think it's district. And I'm going to just see a little bit how the other heat waves also work. See, this one that just says, I think if you just have like hashtag heat wave just anywhere, it does fine. Because if you see like in some things like this, like the garrison, it's not in the front or anything. And then yeah, and then you see right there, you also have it in the back, but these are just class units. They're not specific. They're not specific actual like traits that affect the empire in general. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna look up the resource. Oh my god, how did I spell it? Alright. And I'm going to take this, and I'm going to copy the path. I'm going to go into here, paste that. So for right now, we have like our point of it. We have our whole point where it's going to be affecting any type of resource extractor that we have. Actually, the only thing that I might do instead. Oh, okay. Here's another example. We have our right here actually. Net affinity strategic, something like that. It doesn't necessarily matter, but our main thing is that we have a comma winter at the end, even though it's affecting class city. So the hashtag doesn't necessarily matter as long as you have a as long as you have a comma hashtag, something around there. What I'm going to do actually is that because I don't like to have a something comma and then comma something, because I'm not entirely sure what that will do. I'm going to just do comma and then hashtag heat wave, and I'm going to leave that and so that what that should do is that should just be like anytime it's a heat wave. Let me think for a moment. I think I'm trying to just figure out like how this specifically, like the order of the commas or anything like that. But I think it's fine. I think that if we leave this as is, it'll be fine. The last thing that we're going to need to do is do the same thing, except we add this instead of to a resource deposit. We're going to add this to a we're going to add this to a luxury resource deposit. And so with that, we're going to just add these to our faction trait custom. And since we're not doing anything like the sharing where we're adding something, we're going to just like simply just add this as we normally would as we would do with any type of other faction. The other thing I need to do is that I need to change these two to our names. So we're going to change that to we're Silix faction, so it's going to be SF specific trait. We're going to change this to Heatwave, and I'm just going to copy the name right here because I don't feel like typing that much. Paste that right here. I'm going to paste that right there. Go back into here, copy this right here, go into the custom right here, and go into right here and paste that there. So ideally all of these should work. The only two that like I am a little bit skeptical of is the binary right here. Only not because I'm skeptical of how binary work, but just would it actually read the number of class cities, or would it just do something else entirely? The other thing that we have is going to be the other thing is going to be this as well. However, I have more hope that this will work than this, but I do hope that that all these work. Actually, before we continue, I'm going to actually just do a quick file count for every time we have a every time we have a sort of counting the number of cities in our empire sort of thing, like from the binary. I think what I just said makes kind of no real sense, but if I leave it as that, and if I find all, oh well, there's actually going to be a lot. But the good thing is, so there's going to be a lot right here. There's like 1,000. But the good thing is that we could just kind of scroll down, like, okay, like stun charge, we don't need this, we don't need that, we don't need that we don't need. All of these we don't need. Infiltration of the city, nope, we don't need any of that. So I'm just going to close that out, close that out, close this out, close this out, close this out. So this can go really fast. Okay, Empire, we're going to have the action level, we don't need anything like that. Input, game, empire, money, nope, we don't. Wait, property. Maybe there's something with the property of it, but I'm going to just close that out for now. That's how, number of cities, okay, there we go. So, yeah, that would have been wrong. It's actually called number of cities. So we found it, and now I can say with 100% certainty that this is going to work. So I'm going to minimize that, minimize all of this, go into the game, and we are now going to play test this. So that is essentially the video. We got through all the other faction traits, and these are just, and that's kind of like the most advanced that like you're really going to have with these faction traits. Of course, if you want to have like a faction trait where you get, let's say you want to edit the sort of what's it called, let's say you want to edit the cultist conversion trait, you actually can't do that. I tried many times in order to figure how to do that, but you can't. Oh, oops, that was mine right there. Let me scroll down. And luckily, like with our like hotbar, we can kind of tell if something's working or not. But for the rest of this, I'm going to do a sort of test. And I'm going to play as a Kapaku because I get the trait to see when the actual what's called. I get to see when the actual whole heat wave happens. Oh, we didn't even write anything in our GUI element, so we can go back and change that. But as you can see, +1 morale, +50%. We're going to add. This is our we get +10 C during dust eclipse, so I think that's going to work. Plus 0.5 for number of cities on strategic resource extractors, and provides ability to detect armies in the region. Will be displayed in the form of an elimination marker. Our specific trait right there, and that should be all of our traits. And so I'm just going to call this T just because it doesn't matter. We're going to play as him. And while that is loading, I am going to go back into the game, and I'm just going to add the GUI elements while that is loading.